Hello and welcome to our first race notebook of the season. We have just had the Australian Grand Prix, which was very difficult to predict the outcome for the race, but now the race is finished, we will now talk about the race events. But before we do that, I want to talk about the reliability, and I think it was just a bit too optimistic in my mind to think that only 10 cars will finish the race or less. All the teams showed very good reliability in testing, some obviously were less, but the cars didn't really break down in practice either. Obviously Hamilton broke down in the first practice, the Lotus broke down, a few cars stopped, but the majority of the field didn't stop. They all had a decent practice session, and the reliability was there. Toro Rosso were struggling in practice, but they had a very good race today. We'll get on to that in a minute. But we had 14 cars classified, 15 with Bianchi, but he was 8 laps down, which I'll get into later. But in my opinion, that's about right for Formula 1 to have about 14, 15 cars finishing. It spices up the action because we don't know if the lead, say, for example, Magnussen, Button, Hamilton, Vettel, Wright, Ricciardo all don't finish, then obviously the lesser teams will score more points, for example, and it will spice up the championship. Obviously, I doubt that will all happen and all those names will fall out in one race. But you get a sense of, say, if like one of each team and about 6 of them retired, then obviously it allows a few of the lesser teams to move forward. So I think 14, 15 finishing race is about fine, but obviously reliability will get better throughout the season and less cars will be failing to finish. But moving on to the outcomes of the race, we're going to start with Mercedes first. It was a great result for Mercedes with Nico Rosberg today winning, and they showed great pace throughout the whole race. Rosberg was just in the race of his own. It was a Vettel-esque performance. I don't think Nico Rosberg would like that too much, but nevertheless. But it was a shame with Lewis Hamilton and, running on a couple of laps. Apparently it was only one cylinder less, which caused that engine to have a very rough sound. It was very rough. Same as Sebastian Vettel had a very rough engine sound, which caused also his retirement of the Grand Prix. Williams also looked very strong with Bottas. He had amazing pace and he was easily set to finish in second place. But obviously with the puncher, he lost about 40 seconds with the puncher, which was easy enough because the pass and get up to second, because he ended the race about 40 seconds behind Nico Rosberg. He lost about 40 seconds, not going to the pits, about 20 seconds in the pit and then doing the pit stop, and then obviously it was a free pit stop, so take about 20 seconds off. He could have easily had the pace to go and finish second, because he was also held up behind drivers such as Danny Fiat, not the Salvas. Yeah, he had to go through the Salvas of Gutierrez and Satil. He had to go right through the whole field, so he lost a lot of time, catching that time up. So I think if he didn't have that puncher, if he didn't push too hard to overtake Fernando Alonso, he could have easily finished in second from starting in 50th place, remember, in the Grand Prix. And Bottas put on some amazing overtakes with Kimi Räikkönen. That was an amazing overtake going around the outside of him. He went through the inside of turn 3, and he also went around the outside of turn 3 as well. With other drivers, he had an amazing race. Valtteri Bottas, definitely showing the promise that we have seen from him last season and that we were expecting to see. Disappointing for Massa because he also would have scored points. Obviously, Kobayashi booted him off in the first lap. Moving on to Ferrari now. Ferrari, they're apparently overweight by 18 kilograms, which is very strange that they're overweight by 18 kilograms, and they have a lot of work to do to obviously get that weight down. And they had electrical problems throughout the race, which means they could be quicker in Malaysia. So Kimi Räikkönen, he struggled today with the brakes, just always through that chicane coming up. I think it's turn 8 and 9. He just couldn't do the chicane. It was always going wide, locking up, constantly going into there. So a hard day for Ferrari, you could say, but they got a good amount of points out of it. So, looking at the positives, they did all right with Ferrari today, but still a lot of work to do. Daniel Ricciardo in the Red Bull did a brilliant job today, obviously finishing second, and the Australian crowd was amazing today, absolutely cheering for Ricciardo. It was great support. Was Vettel again, problems with the power unit, which stopped his race, had a very rough sound, just had no power from the get-go. So struggled there for Vettel, but Ricciardo having a very good race and keeping off Magnussen and Button at the end of the Grand Prix. The Lotus would have done well to have completed 40 laps before the race. I had them down to only complete about 15 laps during the race, and with practice sessions, they were breaking down, going back in the pits because, the car was broken and Romain Grosjean was getting very frustrated. But they had a decent race, 40 laps, by far more than what anyone expected. And it was only because of fail of the curves and the ECU stuff for Grosjean and Maldonado that caused them to retire from the Grand Prix. About 18 and 19 laps. They retired very quickly from one another, but very close to the end of the Grand Prix, which is good news for them going to Malaysia if they can fix their problems. Because they don't look too quick, though. That's their problem, sadly. But we're going to move on to McLaren now. With McLaren, they had a very good day with Magnussen finishing third with podium. First Danish on the podium today. So yeah, Magnussen, obviously he didn't do it, last Danish driver in Formula 1. Which is also Kevin Magnussen's dad, if you didn't know, for the younger generation. Barton also showed good pace. Fourth, obviously the safety car helped him a lot. Just diving in, literally on the bubble from getting into the pit lane, getting in 3 places, and he was able to finish 4th place. Toro Rosso were real surprises. Fiat and John-Eric Verne were struggling in practice, always going off. If there was a car or a yellow flag for going off the track, it was probably Fiat and John-Eric Verne for going off the track. But today, amazing performance. So he finished 8th and 9th and 10th place, with John-Eric Verne 9th and Fiat 10th, the youngest ever person to finish up in a points scoring position. So he takes a record off of Vettel. So at least Vettel loses 1 record. But Toro Rosso was the surprise package of the day, I think. So very good for them. And Red Bull obviously is a surprise package of the weekend, but I think Toro Rosso was a surprise package of the race. Force India, they did well with Hulkenberg. He was very quick, but obviously they need to find a bit more mechanical grip because obviously the Mercedes power unit is a very good power unit, which is shown with Williams and Mercedes. But Force India, I think, are lacking a bit more mechanical grip, which Williams and Mercedes have found in order to try and make up the time that they are, because Hulkenberg was in 4th for a while in that race, but fell a long way back behind the McLaren and the Mercedes, and Bottas was streaming through the field from 15th place, and obviously he probably was quick as well and would have overtaken Hulkenberg, which he did towards the end of the race. So not too bad. And Perez had a puncture on lap 1, and he only clawed it back to 11th place. Sauber had a strong pace. They did 1 stop, so they had a good. It was good for them. They're good on the tyres, but they're not as quick. They seem to be in a race of their own because Gutierrez and Sutil were in the same pitch, but there was no one really around them. Caterham, they had problems with Ericsson. The curves fell, that's why he went out of the race. And why Kobayashi punted Felipe Massa at the beginning of the Grand Prix was because apparently Kobayashi had no rear brakes. So therefore he could not slow down the rear of the car and just went straight on, braked too hard because he was going too fast, and locked up the front and went into Felipe Massa. Sadly, Marussia yet again had a solid race. Obviously the cars, as I said, the engine switched off at the beginning of the race. This was caused because of an overheating problem. So the sensors picked up the overheating and they stopped the engine. So that was like a procedure to stop the engine because there was too much overheating, because we had 2 formation laps today. Bianchi obviously was a bit longer to fix. He did, both cars finished the race, but Bianchi was not classified. He was 8 laps down, and so he was not classified. But still, a lot of learning from Marussia, and they're a bit. I don't know how to class it. Still too early. They don't seem to be quick enough to challenge Toro Rosso and Sauber at the moment. Obviously, Toro Rosso are right up there, so maybe Sauber, but a lot of learning still to do, and for Caterham as well. But that is really all I have time for in today's Race Notebook. Thank you so much for listening to the Race Notebook. We will be back in Malaysia for the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the race, the new look Formula 1, the new era that was here. Please remember to like, favourite and subscribe to F1 Breakdown. Make sure you visit the website www.f1breakdown.co.uk. There's polls, there's news stories, and there's other podcasts which you can watch. Thank you so much for listening, and goodbye.